Hey guys, it's John David here with How to Get an Analytics Job podcast. Today I'm going to be interviewing Ken Jee, who is a data scientist that focuses on sports analytics. And he has just got just a wide breadth of knowledge just in the data science space. And he applies it so interestingly to sports analytics. So Ken, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to kind of share a little bit of my story and hopefully help out some people that are interested in this kind of specific sports-focused niche of data science.
Great. So why don't you just share kind of that story, that narrative of how you got to where you are right now?
Sure, I'd love to. So right now I'm the director of data science at a small consulting company. And again, this company specializes mostly in sports analytics. So the two sports that we do the most of are basketball and golf. And so really the reason I got into analytics at all was because of my initial interest in sports. So in college, I played college golf, and I went to college to play golf. I didn't go to study. I didn't go to learn anything. And I went through like 7 different majors in my first couple of years.
Wow.
And I finally ended up, I think I did like psychology, environmental science, health exercise, regardless, so many different things. But I finally ended up taking an economics course. And it changed the way I view the world. Economics, although it's maybe not like completely the most quantitative discipline out there, it is trying to understand the world through trends and through numbers. And so I immediately thought, well, how do I apply this to my golf game? So I was one of the very few people that I know of, at least on my college team, that was really tracking my stats and trying to focus on areas where I saw that there was like quantitative improvement needed. So that is where I kind of got my first taste of how valuable kind of analytics in general, specifically sports analytics, could be in improving performance. After college, I tried to play professional golf, and it really didn't go quite as well as I had hoped. I
mean,
could
it's
look
really
at it,
competitive, right?
yeah, I could look at it, fairly objectively, again, from this kind of quantitative background, and realize that at least then I was not good enough, and it probably would have taken way more time than I had to get to the point where I wanted to be. So I was a little bit lost, and I knew that I liked the sports analytics stuff, but I didn't know how to get to the next step. So I ended up going back to school. I went to the University of Virginia, and I got my master's in global commerce. So this program is largely focused on getting kids into consulting or investment banking because it is a target school. And that's what I kind of thought I wanted to do. I also knew that through that program, I would get a lot more exposure to analytics. That's one of the big things that they promoted. So I went there. I learned a whole bunch of new skills, probably mostly soft skills and kind of more towards the visualization side. And, I got that quote unquote dream job of working in management consulting. And so actually, if I rewind a little bit, before I went to Virginia, I managed to sneak an internship in there before, and it was at this company called DraftKings. So DraftKings is a daily fantasy sports company.
Oh yeah, I've heard of them.
And so I got to work on that, and I got absolutely obsessed with this concept. And so through grad school, I was like applying everything I learned in school to try and like win these games and improve improve a model there. I ended up not really making any money. Actually, I ended up losing quite a bit of money, but it was still like that whole process and that type of challenge that was fascinating to me. So, jumping forward again, I worked in consulting for about 6 months, and I realized that like I don't feel like I'm growing. I don't really enjoy this process. The quantitative stuff, which I was building in school, I'm not doing really any of that. I'm just putting together PowerPoint decks, and I'm like, telling people stuff that they're going to forget in a couple of weeks.
Right.
So I got really, I realized that this analytics was moving more towards the technological side. So I decided to go back and just go full 180 from my business background and get a master's in computer science. So around this time,
Wow, so you have 2 master's degrees.
yeah, they're kind of just lying on the ground over there.
Oh wait, so how old were you when you like first actually kind of got traction in the analytics space?
So I was right in like the middle of my computer science degree. So
Okay.
that's when I was like taking all that stuff and applying it. I was doing analytics even before that. Like I was all of my consulting projects, I was trying to get as much analytics exposure as possible, but there just frankly wasn't enough for me in that role. So I I eventually started this degree, and around the same time, I started working with the Scouts Consulting Group, which is where I work now. So I was able to really grow in that role. I started as a data scientist and kind of worked my way up to managing some of the other data scientists. And this experience of going from the business side to the technical side is what is like a very, very fascinating thing for me, because learning computer science, going and getting a master's degree in it without having like a background in it is absolutely terrifying. But I knew that was kind of a means to an end for me to like truly understand the field of sports the way I wanted to. I was always getting stuck. I was like, oh, I feel like my models are almost there, but they're just missing something. And that was the missing piece, is like the technical know-how and a lot of the like math fundamentals to be able to understand like why we implement things in certain ways.
Yeah, we are on opposite ends of the analytics spectrum because, I hire people like you to do all the data crunching and like the heavy lifting and stuff like that. But I guess we're not totally on the opposite ends of the spectrum, because you do have some business acumen that you get from that first master's degree. So I got an MBA with a concentration in analytics, which means that I'm kind of getting into that quantitative side of like what's driving results. But I mean, nowhere to the point where like I'm creating out. I mean, I am using some predictive modeling. Like, have you heard of Einstein Analytics?
No, I haven't.
So Einstein Analytics is it's basically like, how Tableau is just point and click. It's just a GUI that like lets you build out visualizations. It's the same concept but applied to predictive modeling.
Oh, cool. I know that there's like a company called Data Robot that does that really, really well, and I'm familiar with the model. Yeah.
I mean, it is pretty fascinating how things are becoming easier and easier to, I guess, companies like Tableau are hard at work basically democratizing all like advanced data, and it's getting, progressively more advanced and easier to do.
Yeah.
But I mean, at the same time though, I don't have that deep understanding of mathematics like you do. So my judgment isn't quite as strong.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's an interesting space, because I think for some things you need it. And for other things, it's almost completely useless.
Do you have,
right? So if I'm working in a company and I'm doing something that, I'm building a model that no one's ever done before, like there's a very specific use case, like I need to have like a great foundation in math, probably even like a PhD in one of these quantitative fields to be able to build something new. But if I'm just implementing a model that like people already know how to implement, you don't really need that advanced education. You just need to know like the steps of actually like, okay, why do we use this model? How do we implement it? And just let it go. And so that's something that, I've kind of been wrestling with. Like I love the kind of like experiential learning where I'm trying something completely new. I'm building something from scratch. But, that's also like, it's a little stressful to kind of do that type of work, because you never know how long it's going to take. You never know how much effort it's really going to build out. So.
Yeah, we're kind of on the opposite ends there too. In that, what I'm trying to do is solve specific problems. Like, for example, Tableau was just bought by Salesforce, so I'm trying to figure out how can I create basically a productized service offering. So I can say, here's how you should approach sales analytics, and that'll get 80% of their needs met, and then I can bring in data scientists like you to bring in extra customization if needed. Which I guess that's getting kind of into more of the entrepreneurial space. So to kind of bring it back to the podcast title, how would you advise someone going about getting a sports analytics job? What are the key fundamental steps there?
Well, so getting a sports analytics job is not all that different from getting a traditional, analytics job. And, I've listened to some of your other podcasts, and one of the biggest things that I always recommend to everyone, almost for any type of job, is to gather as much work experience as you can get. And work experience doesn't necessarily have to be like working at another company. Work experience can be done through volunteering. It can be done through personal projects. It can be done a whole mess of different ways. So especially in sports, you really have to have a portfolio. You have to be able to say how you can create value for a team. If I've done a project where I say, for XYZ basketball team, if you make these changes, if my analysis says that if you make these changes, you might be able to win one or two more games a year, if I am that organization, why would I not hire you to actually just like purchase that analysis from you effectively and eventually get more of that type of stuff from you in the future? So you're opening so many doors just through like the value you're creating through these projects, but you're also learning the skills yourself. Through these projects, that's the best way to learn any of the techniques that are out there. A little bit different than analytics in general. Sports analytics kind of has its own language and its own specifics and some like out of the box models that people use. So, rather than just always using like different types of regression techniques, there's like, weighted models that people have, calculated over time rather than approximated. An example of that is probably the most basic model in baseball, which is called the Pythagorean theorem of baseball. So basically Bill James, who's like the godfather of baseball analytics, he found that if you add up basically the number, like a function of the number of runs that you've scored and the number of runs that are scored against you, can equate to your winning percentage. I think it's like runs scored, squared over runs scored plus runs scored against squared, something like that. But it's a great approximation of this winning percentage. And that's like knowledge that's passed down. It's not built from like a previous model beforehand. We're not projecting that out. So you have to understand those fundamentals. And the best way to do that is through these projects and through just reading a ton of stuff out there. The other thing that I think is especially relevant in this field is sharing that information. So either putting it on GitHub, either doing that in Kaggle, or just tweeting it out. The sports analytics community is so active, and if something is interesting, it'll get a lot of traction. And you'd be shocked how many times the things that get traction really lead to like great opportunities for that person. For example,
yeah.
For
so
example,
I was going to say,
go ahead.
Michael, I just interviewed Michael Galarnik, who I don't know if you checked out the podcast highlight we posted, I think on Wednesday of this week. But I mean, his blog is getting 200,000 to 300,000 views a month right now.
Yeah.
And he's writing on Medium, and he said even just like answering questions on different websites like Reddit or Facebook, that has led to people saying, oh wow, this is a really insightful answer.
Yeah.
You want to come work for my company?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple different tiers of that. Like projects are great. 1 for learning, 2 for like actually putting yourself out there and getting noticed. But 3, there's so many like data science projects out there that just turn into companies. Like I build a great model, I wrap a business around it, and like I don't even need to look for a job if I do that. And to me, that's fascinating. You know what I mean? Like to me, there, aside from like, yes, you're spending time, but if you're interested in this field, there's no better way that you can spend your time, other than doing projects, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I was thinking about that this morning, actually, of how I'm putting like a shit ton of work into the YouTube channel, but it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
It feels like the analogy I made is I don't know if you played those world building games when you were a kid, where it's you have your castle and then you send your troops out here, and then all of a sudden your map, it goes from being black everywhere to just illuminate on your castle to all of a sudden you can see this. And I feel like that's what I'm doing. It's like I'm gamifying my day-to-day workflow. And it's like, instead of being some nerd just sitting in their mom's basement, I'm like actually making money. It's not like just, these imaginary coins that you're getting, in some game.
I think that is like probably one of the most important things is like making sure that it is fun and that you're enjoying it. If you don't enjoy doing projects, if you don't enjoy doing analytics, if you don't like working in Tableau, like it's probably not, this field probably isn't a good fit for you. You know what I mean? And like, it's so hard to do something that's like against the grain for yourself. If that is the case for you, there's 2 options. You either stop, which might be advisable, or you can find a way to enjoy it. You find a way to like get excited about this. If I'm doing vanilla analytics, not on sports, it's not overwhelmingly interesting to me. But if I'm working on sports projects, I spend countless hours just like toying with the models, having fun, and just like learning so much about this field. So, you really have to find your niche. You have to find your projects that are interesting to you to like harness that energy that you get from those concepts.
Well, it also, you're kind of gets into this topic of, if you're not passionate about data science or analytics, people like you who are not just going to be 10% better than you. They're going to be like 2000% better because that's what they think about,
Yeah.
I'm starting to notice it in my own life, in that I'm like waking up and having dreams about like new content that I'm creating, or, like how I'm going to pitch this new deal. Like it's like really sunk into my subconscious, and I'm like really thinking from kind of like a deeper level about it. It's not just like, I worked at Volvo trucks for 6 months and 2 consecutive internships. I did not think about that. I was like in there, did my time, did the work that I had to, and then got out. And it was just like I was like a weekend warrior at that point. I just like wanted to
Yeah.
live for the
Well,
weekends.
you learn to a certain extent what you don't enjoy by trying a bunch of different things. And so,
Right.
I after school, I was like, you know what, I want to try and like work in a different role than like my current position. So I left. I basically took a year and I worked as a product owner, where I was managing data scientists, and I was working on like showing them, like combining the actual business with the data science model. So we're like the integration specialist. I'm overseeing these projects and these data scientists, and that just wasn't that interesting to me. The analytics are very high level. Like the data scientists were really, really smart, but I wasn't like stimulated by it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that, I think you and myself both kind of fall into that entrepreneurial category, where like sometimes it's easier to get out of bed for yourself than it is for a company if you don't always necessarily believe in it. So,
Yeah.
um, again, that applies almost directly to this data science path, is that, you try some roles, you try an internship in this field, and like, if you can't get enough of it, then it's probably like an incredible fit for you. And if you can't wait to leave, uh, that's a sign in the other direction.
Right. That's true. So the next thing I wanted to ask you about is, how did you go about building out your data science portfolio?
So I actually recommend a little bit different way than I went about it.
Oh, even better.
Um, you know, I had to do quite a bit of projects through school, and
Mm-hmm.
those were great for building up my portfolio. One really nice thing through school is that I had a lot of control over the topics of my projects. I don't think that that's necessarily common in a bunch of schools. I had to do a lot of the basic stuff. So one thing that almost everyone does, they do like mince data set deep learning, which is like an image classifier for numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't want to see that on your resume. That's like the most boring thing in the world. Every single person does that. Like, um, but in my classes, I was told to take it a step further, to find my own data and to build these projects out with on topics that I found fascinating. And so I did 3 of my projects in school that way. Other ones, I just tried to focus on topics that I thought were interesting. For example, I'm working on a project right now that we talked a little bit about before the show, about predicting or trying to evaluate if the Astros actually gained a tangible advantage from the trash can banging that was done. That to me, it's like a cool question to answer. That's something that like I think a lot of other people would be interested in,
Right.
and it's relevant to the times. It's relevant to someone.
Mm-hmm.
With these projects, especially in data science, data analytics, you always have to be thinking about the end user. Like, what value is this creating for someone? Let's go back to the mints data set, right, where we're classifying numbers. In isolation, that's really not useful to anyone. If we apply it to a scenario, let's say I wanted to create a image capture thing for golf scorecards where everyone writes their scores down, and I want to be able to like take a picture of it and upload it to a file, then it's inherently useful. That is the step that you want to take in these projects to make it like actionable and exciting to someone. And that's something that, aside from kind of getting started with that in mind, that's something that I would always recommend, is just like, think about the end user, think about problems that are out there, and frame their projects around those.
Interesting. So, what platforms or what tools are you using to actually build out these projects?
So I mostly use Python.
Okay.
So I I started coding in Python. That was like my first programming class I ever took. And I think compared to R, it's a bit more flexible, especially on the programming side. If I wanted to make a pipeline around my algorithm, it's a little bit easier. I can do something just like quick and Flask. R is great, probably more so on the visualization side using R Shiny. I just don't use them quite as much.
Yeah, that's what my data scientist uses is R Shiny
Yeah,
to
but
get to get these
yeah,
projects done.
I mean, I usually recommend Python. I don't think that there's anything wrong with using R. I
Mhm.
think but I also think Python's a bit more organized in the way it functions. Actually, in sports analytics in general, I would say more people use R than in like industry. And I'm obviously pushing the other direction, but it still is inherently practical. There's great packages out there, especially for football data. A lot of the main analysis is done in R.
Interesting. So you're getting a little bit outside of like, I guess, my stake or pail of knowledge. I mainly use Tableau or Power BI. Is there a place for that in sports analytics, or do you need to know like actual, like, heavy mathematics coding to actually get a sports analytics job?
I think there's absolutely a place for that in sports analytics. So, there's like a famous saying, you probably know who said it, I can't remember, but basically what gets measured gets managed, right?
Right.
And Tableau, Power BI, these are just great ways to like measure things and show what is being measured. And so that's how you create like an incredible feedback loop. Like coaches are constantly looking at like Power BI, Tableau reports to understand how their players performed in each game so that they have like actionable things for the next practice or for the next game or any of these things. So, it is one part of the pipeline. There's in most organizations usually like multiple types of analytics. So you have like current analytics, which is mostly dashboard reporting, where you want to know what's happening in real time or what happened in the last game or what happened in practice, things like that. And you also have kind of the deeper data science type of projects where you're trying to create long-term advantages. If we do this, then we'll win more games. And there is that kind of hybrid that how do we take what we learned from these bigger data science projects and use those and get the correct incentives around what we produce in the dashboards to make long-lasting changes. So for example, it's like a hypothetical, we want to shoot more 3-point shots, right? I mean,
Right.
Okay, well, we'll measure that in the actual dashboards, and we'll show that to the players or the coaches.
So it's like giving them almost like marching orders. Like this is,
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. This course hasn't published yet, but I have a course coming out on LinkedIn Learning called Fundamentals of Analytics, and from the way that I break it down, or like the way that I've researched it, is there's descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive, or prescriptive. I'm not sure how to say that word correctly. But yeah, so descriptive is just you're looking backwards. Predictive is you're starting to like notice trends. And then prescriptive is where you're actually, yeah, like you said, combining those two to say, here's what you need. Here's like the cheat code to win you the game.
Yeah. I would actually argue that there's even one more step beyond that,
Oh,
which
really?
is like automated, right?
Hmm.
So, the biggest thing in data science in like large organizations and in Google, Uber, all these things is how do you like productionize this model so humans don't even have to look at it, right?
Right.
So we basically like make that model into an API endpoint. People like send data to it and it responds with an actual prediction. So rather than even like informing decision making, it's actually making the decision, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about, that a lot of our processes work like that now.
Yeah, that's like the AI future.
Yeah.
The computers are just pushing us out. But the research I did for that course is that about 80% of businesses, which I'm not sure how this would compare. Maybe this is actually an interesting topic. 80% of businesses fall within that descriptive stage. They haven't gone to stage 2 or maybe 1% are in stage 3. Kind of probably like the Silicon Valley companies. Um, How much of sports analytics falls within that descriptive and then maybe phase 2 and phase 3? Have you ever been asked this question before?
So I've never been asked that specific question. So I don't think I can give you exact numbers, but what I can tell you is that sports analytics is it's like lumpy, it's spiky. Like there are some teams that are just so far ahead of the game, it's unbelievable. You look at like the Houston Rockets or the Golden State Warriors. They're doing things that like people aren't even like thinking of right now, right? Like that is so far advanced that it's completely off other people's radars. There's some people that are kind of in the meddling middle, and then there's some people that are just like, sports is old school, right? They're just like, we won doing other stuff, and we're going to keep doing that.
Well, they're all about their intuition.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, my gut feel, and I think there's a value for that. I don't think that we should totally just like throw the baby out with the bathwater.
No, I completely agree. And so the best teams, I actually, even though there's all this Astros controversy now, I read a book a while ago called Astro Ball, which talks about how their whole organization works, right?
Mm-hmm.
And aside from the cheating, the biggest thing that I took away is that, you know, they don't look down on the old school gut feeling. They just try and quantify that, right? So they tell their scouts to go do the exact same things that they did before, and we're going to help you get better. We're going to tell you when you were right and wrong. And like, you'll be able, like, humans are models, you'll be able to create a better model of yourself. And when you see something, when you return with results, you'll be more accurate. And so like, yeah, they took this hybrid approach, which I think is the future in business and sports and any of these things. So, you know, without a doubt, there's a ton of room for that still. But I mean, again, in sports, there's some people, it's all over the place. Sports are traditional, it's old school, and for some, obviously some sports are moving faster than others as well.
Interesting. So I guess let's get to the question, like kind of the question of the day, so to speak. So what does a sports analyst do day to day? And, you know, you actually have a video on this, right?
I do. Yeah.
So maybe just recap that.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I can leave a link in the description down below.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. There's actually a reasonable amount of diversity even within sports analytics. So there's 3 or 4 different types of roles you can have. You can either work like in the front office, where you're helping teams actually improve their performance. You're advising how, you know, coaches like the decision making. You're telling players what to work on to actually improve their game. You also have the other side of working for a sports team, where you're evaluating like ticket sales or things like that.
Oh, okay. The business side.
Yeah, the business side. And then you have media, right, where it's less about improving performance and it's more about telling a really interesting story, right? You see these graphics on TVs during a football game or during a golf tournament, any of these stats. They're out there to like engage the fans, to actually bring people in and add to their understanding of the game. And then finally, you have this kind of sports betting side with, again, the rise of DFS and with the relaxation of the sports gambling laws. I mean, this is really going to grow in the future. This is completely about predicting outcomes, not trying to like improve outcomes. You're trying to just understand what happens in the most accurate way. So depending on what type of role you're in, you're going to be building very different types of models. So the first one, you're going to be looking a lot at player data. You're going to be trying to understand, okay, what causes bad things to happen or good things to happen on the field or on the court. You know, if you're looking from the media angle, you're going to be building out a lot of exploratory analysis, and you're going to be building a lot of visuals, because, I mean, frankly, everything is visual. I mean, like, there's a reason Instagram is so popular and some of these other platforms have fallen off, because we just respond so well to pictures.
Right.
And then for the daily fantasy stuff, it's basically all looking at and evaluating outcomes. So, you know, obviously those are 3 very different types of analytics, very different types of data science techniques that are used. On a more day-to-day basis, it's no real different than a regular analyst or a data scientist would do. So you do a lot of data collection, you do a lot of kind of data manipulation, a lot of feature engineering, which is kind of how you get the most out of these sports models. And then you're doing normal model selection, feature tuning, productionization, whatever it might be. And one thing that I've noticed in sports analytics is that, you're not always communicating information to business people or people that are data scientists. You're sometimes communicating to athletes or to coaches. And, these people are brilliant, but they just don't have as much exposure to like the language you use as a data scientist or a business
the
person.
vernacular that you use.
Yeah. So it's really interesting to try and communicate something that is like very complex in a data science sphere to someone that hasn't had that much exposure to the field. So, that is something that probably would behoove you if you wanted to get into this field to think about trying to use sports terms in a data science mindset.
Well, I mean, you're touching on soft skills, which is something that I feel like I've been pushing on this channel for a while, and just people don't want to hear it. They don't want to like talk about soft skills and how you need to influence people and how you need to put together a compelling argument. A lot of the people I think that are attracted to analytics and data science, they just want to like crunch numbers, and they just like want to, I think that they're very highly intelligent, but they're also creative. So they want to like kind of build their own world. And the thing about that is that it's not insulated. Like you can't build this thing and it's not communicating with the outside world at all.
Yeah, well, I think that there is a portion of data science and analytics where you kind of have to be a salesman. You have to get someone to believe in your analysis. You have to get someone to see the same things that you're seeing. And like, from a business side, you usually have to convince a stakeholder to actually adopt your work, to actually use it and put it into practice. It doesn't end when you finish the analysis. It ends when it creates value for your company or for your organization. And you're not going to be useful or valuable to anyone if your product, your analysis is not getting used. I see a lot of data scientists trending towards, in their projects specifically, like, hey, I use this really complex algorithm. I built this like super advanced neural net. And that's all they'll say. They won't say like what the outcomes of the project were. They won't say if they got good results, the best results with that. And it's all about results, especially in sports. If your coaches get fired if they lose, 10 games a year in football, right? It's like, it is all about results and wins and losses.
Well, and I think that's going on there, which I've actually had this conversation with Jasmine O'Connell, she works as a director of analytics for a medical startup here in the Greensboro, High Point, Winston-Salem area. She was saying that a lot of these analysts or data scientists that she works with, they see like complexity as value and them holding their weight and them feeling like proud of themselves. But a lot of times they don't have that judgment of how to apply all this like really sophisticated, advanced stuff in a meaningful way.
Yeah, well, one of my favorite concepts, it was in one of my first data science courses. I had a really good professor, and he told us about Occam's razor. Are you familiar with this?
Wait, hold on. I'm thinking of Peter's principle. No, I can't come up with it. What is it?
Occam's razor is basically the simplest approach that produces roughly the same results as what you should always use.
Right. It's like, keep it simple, stupid.
Yes. And I think that is absolutely the most practical thing to do with data science. That's how you should be looking at every one of these problems, every one of these like data sets you're trying to tackle, is you're trying to say, okay, how do I get the best results with like the simplest model? Can I get the same results with a naive Bayes classifier as I do with a random forest? Like the complexity one on your machine for you to do naive Bayes over random forest is like so much more simple, and it, uses so much less processing power, but it's also, there's so much less that can go wrong. There's so much less randomness. There's all these things. Right. So you should just always be trying to focus on like, okay, like the same with communication, same with all these soft skills, is that you want to give maximal impact with not the least amount of effort, but the least amount of overhead.
Well, actually this, in the interview that I did with Azdu Souley, who's like the Excel guru guy and Excel MVP, we had a very similar conversation around data quality. Like you eventually hit a point of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
So like, for example, if I'm one of my clients, they sell manufacturing goods, and 95% in stock is good enough, because from them going from 95 to 96%, that might be a benefit of like, $1,000. But the cost on their supply chain is like $100,000 or $250,000 to get, and you just kind of have to like balance, how much you're going to be putting into it. Well, I guess with the Occam Razors thing, are you saying that it's like the exact same results?
Very similar results. It doesn't have to be the exact same. But I think what you're talking about is actually completely true, not just with data, but with any model that you build. I mean, there's like any model that you build, anything of a value that you put out, you could almost certainly make them better, right? But you
Right.
get diminishing returns the better you make it, in terms of time, in terms of like how much code you have to write, in terms of all these things. And like I would say that almost every single project, like if you're a perfectionist, although it's surprising, like data science might not be for you, because you're almost never going to get 100% accurate model, right?
Right.
I think of like the total work that you could possibly do on a project or model, you should leave it at like 80%, because that's the right amount of time that you put in. The model should still get incredible results. It should still be effectively as good as you can make it without going like super overboard. But you have these tools like grid search, you have some of these other things that like get you like far enough along to produce something that's valuable to someone. Again, that is kind of the key term here.
Right. Well, I actually wanted to kind of close out the interview on this question. Would you say sports analytics is a saturated marketplace in terms of job opportunities? And I guess the second part to that same question is, are there any emerging opportunities in that space that you might advise someone to research and start to kind of head in that direction?
So I think the answer to your question is yes and no. So in terms of working for individual sports teams, it's really hard to get one of those jobs. You're looking at, around in the major sports, less than 200 total teams. And you're looking at maybe, let's say they have 5 people on staff, you're looking at less than 1,000 jobs, right?
Wow.
But sports analytics is going to be growing so fast in a couple of these different areas, especially in the media and in the like sports gambling realms. There's going to be a ton of jobs in those spaces going forward, I think. So while working for an individual team is like really tough, really competitive, I think that you can go learn the skills in media, learn the skills in some of these other places, especially in the gambling realm. And you can take those back and be more valuable to the team later on after you've really established yourself and done a lot of these different projects. So there's going to be this huge boom, and I wouldn't recommend that anyone gambles on sports or even really plays fantasy, just for my own liability's sake.
Yeah.
But I think that the types of questions that you're trying to solve in that field are like the cutting edge of data science, of analytics, because you're like trying to predict an outcome. And if you're right, you make money. And if you lose money. Like, is there a pure form of like quote unquote competitive analytics than that? I don't think so. So again, ton of opportunities there. And you never know. I think a lot of teams are really adopting an interest in analytics, and they might grow, they might scale in very different ways.
Interesting. So it's almost like there's a new economy that's opening up.
Yeah.
Where you can actually either have your own startup, like you said earlier in the interview. There are companies now forming around, effective data science models.
Yeah. And, if you're more interested in this field, I actually have a website called Playing Numbers. And that's a great place to like learn all of this, to get sports specific data and to actually share your work. So that's one thing that I'm really pushing is, if I can create a platform where people can share their work around these different fields, like they might be able to get a job through that avenue. So hopefully, getting exposure, one, more on the media side and the betting side, will be beneficial to everyone in terms of learning.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for this interview. I feel like you just gave us all this wonderful insight and information. Are there any ways you want to plug yourself? So Ken Jee, just your name on YouTube, and then Playing Numbers .com, .org,
Yeah, .com. Yeah.
.com.
Those are my two main things. If you're interested, you can follow me on Twitter, but I basically just send out my videos and the content that I produce. So,
Great.
if you do follow me on YouTube, you can expect content related to sports analytics, data science, and I also occasionally share some of the projects that I'm working on. So hopefully that's fun. It's a little different perspective, and hopefully you'll be able to learn something.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this.